Peacemaker Teams picture. Someone else's picture that they were able to access and get. But when that picture broke to the Associated Press and all around the world, everyone began to ask, who knew this was going on? Is there any evidence for this? Is this a one-time thing or what? And then all those embassies and USAID had to were back on their heels oh yeah, we did get some information about that about 6 months ago, right? And so then all that data that we and other organizations had worked together provided the backup and the support for that to go forward. So we really trust that even though what we do may not seem effective at the time, that we do want to be strategic and we do want to be effective as well. That in being faithful and into listening to those who are most impacted by violence, we will be guided in how we want to move forward and show up in any particular space. As we did the work in Iraq and Palestine, Mexico, Bosnia and Herzegovina, other places, we also saw that the violence wasn't just out there again, but that, as Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist scholar and religious leader, would say, that violence and nonviolence run through the heart of each one of us. And so in CPT's journey as well, CPT is only about 31, 32 years old, just a little bit younger than me. So, as we matured, let's say, into our 20s, we realized that we carried inside of us, many peacemakers carried inside of just this sense that, okay, well, if they could just fix this, or if we could just adjust this thing, carried inside of us an idea that we could fix things, or a very U.S.-centric mentality, or one in which we realized that the violence of U.S.-centrism, or the violence of racism, and the violence of sexism was, that those are real violences too, the violence of economic exploitation things. And so we took some time as CPT to scale back in the number of places we were serving to do an internal look at the organization. Because given that our historic constituencies were primarily European American, we were missing some key voices in decision-making power and in influence in CPT from diverse backgrounds. And also want to make sure there's a balance of genders. And CPT is an unapologetically inclusive organization. We need each and every person to be a peacemaker, and especially those who have been marginalized in the areas of family making or in the areas of being allowed to self-express, give particular insights for how to make peace. Because what is peacemaking if it's not becoming a global family in a way? So we became an inclusive organization as it relates to people from any orientation, as well as however people decide to make family. We began to make sure that we could serve CPTers for their own mental health as they did this work. And we sought to really say, how can we make our internal organization also reflect this deep and gutsy peacemaking that we want to see happen outside? So that was another time too. And even though we were so-called doing less out there, all the work is one, and so we did some with inside the organization to make sure that we had healthier representation on our steering committee, and that we broadened the base of support for Christian Peacemaker Teams, and let communities of color here and others know that what we were doing around the world, and that we knew that they also had something to give and something to offer. So that was also part of our work at CPT, to look at this process of what we began to call undoing oppressions. It's just looking at the way in which the root of the word oppression is pressing down. In fact, I want you to do this. Just press yourself down in a little ball, and you'll start to just take all the air out of yourself, and this is just feel that oppression and that tension in your body. And what that means, and if you open your eyes after squinting, you can see what range of vision you have now and how limited it is. But if you take a deep breath slowly and come up, and just that breath symbolizing the infusion of resources and the infusion of spirit and the infusion of time, clearly the process is not this easy, but you are able to come back up. You can roll your shoulders back. Your heart is open. That process of undoing what has balled us down and pressed us down and hurt other people, and being able to see how that has affected those who are marginalized in society, and the process of undoing oppressions, being able to allow more people to participate fully. So that's a journey that we continue to be on, and we just really feel that, you can only go as far externally as you go internally. But at the same time, this is not about getting yourself perfect or just what's happening in your home as well, because you can only go as far internally as you go externally. So it's just kind of this dynamic process of peacemaking.
Other questions?
I'm saying peacemaking, but you can also apply it to your mission, right? That dynamic process of mission, of action and reflection. And
Just curious about your encounter with those military fellows. Did they ever find out who you really were, and how did that turn out?
So, they asked us our names then. I said my name was Sarah. She said her name was Elizabeth. That was true. They said, "Oh, good Hebrew names. Are you Jewish?" I said, "No, but I do believe that we are all connected, and in seminary I studied some Hebrew. And there are many things I would really like to say to the U.S. military now that I had them. The U.S. military, yes, and the Israeli military. I'm recorded, so I won't say that they're the same militaries on tape. But there's a lot of funds flowing back and forth, and a lot of exportation of military knowledge, and Israeli military expertise is coming to train local police officers in Dallas, L.A., Chicago. It's problematic. But so there's a lot I want to say. But what I had memorized in class with Ben Olenberger in Hebrew class, we had a recitation. And so they said, "Oh, okay, so you speak some Hebrew, let's hear it." So my recitation was the Ten Commandments. So I had Lo tirtza, v'lo tin'af, v'lo tignov, v'lo ta'aseh siveka ed shav. Only words in Hebrew I can remember for that moment were do not kill, do not steal, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. So they were like, "Oh." It was like this awesome, holy, and awkward silence in which the next person broke the silence with, "Eat some more food. Have some more food for your long journey ahead." So we packed up the food, and we kind of just said our goodbyes, and then kind of made our way back down the road. Definitely our hearts burning within us. So that was the interaction.
Other questions? I want to make okay, that's fine. I'll come back.
And it's fine that there's no other questions, because then we can all do a little itty-bitty part of Christian Peacemaker Teams training.
I just have a comment. I appreciated your use of the word agitation when you spoke about your work. And it made me think of a washing machine. As it agitates, it cleans and cleanses. And people who do their laundry at the river have to bang that laundry really hard. And the kind of work you're doing is a cleansing work for the nations.
Thank you. And that, I think, deeply relates to this process of us peacemaking, that it's also ongoing. One doesn't say like, "Oh, I washed my clothes last year. I don't need to wash them again," But so often we may say that around something like learning about injustice, right? "Oh, I took that anti-racism workshop, so I don't have to deal with that anymore," or these types of things. But rather that it's a process of constant agitation, and then wear, and then agitation, and then wear, and the process of getting cleansed, which and coming together in worship, that's all this big process of it. So thank you for that analogy. Really appreciate it.
Wasn't here in first service. How much was mentioned about the rally yesterday and potential ICE detention center and things like that in the first service? A lot or not much?
Not much. I think we're still holding this pretty closely as different members of the community are facing a number of different pressures with regards to it. But if you want to give a briefing on that, that's totally fine and welcome. It was for me it was the largest rally that I had attended on the courthouse lawn, even despite the weather, and people out there to say we want to be a welcoming community, we want to be an inclusive community, we wanted to support everyone here, and this installation does not seem to take us a step closer to that. And it was fairly multifaceted, looking at resources and for the community, for everyone. And what I just come from though was, and what we can invite you all to, is that as we get ready for potentially anything that could happen, just as you would prepare yourself for a natural disaster that you hope never happens, we also, I think, maybe are called to prepare ourselves for political disasters that we hope never happen, but we can be prepared. And the political disasters that have happened and continue to happen are raids and incidences of police brutality and other things. And so there is a small working group of the Elkhart Goshen Sanctuary Coalition that's called the Rapid Response and Sanctuary in the Streets Working Group. And Waterford and every other church and organization and group is welcome to send a couple of people to get training in that rapid response and in nonviolent direct action. Bill was at the planning meeting training yesterday, but he might be him or someone else that gets nominated, and then you all will come and train your community here at Waterford. What does it mean for our affinity group to show up well, or how could we respond? So we're planning for a training for trainers, and that will happen December 9 and 10, and you all can pick some people to send, and then they'll come and report back, as well as help get you ready for something skills that we hope we never have to use. But at this time, it is also a way to take our testimonies into protest, or what I like to call protestifying. So we're just going to get ready. So the training for trainers is happening December 9 and 10, and that is related to what's happening with the detention center, but also more broadly with the harm that is already so intense here. But if you want to say anything further.
Well, you've done a lot of what I was going to say, and that's perfect, and that's excellent, because it's not only about proposed detention center, and for a few of you, if you didn't see an email that we sent out or don't receive email, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement Agency is very much wanting to have a 800 to 1,200 bed immigration prison built in Elkhart, across the road from the current county jail, and that would not be operated by them. It would be operated by Core Civic, a private, for-profit prison operation facility, which is very disturbing to many of us. And so that's the news that has just made the news locally. And so many of us in the churches and in the community are trying to mobilize. So what does it mean to influence the decision-making processes within the next month or two in order that might not happen here locally? But yesterday, Sarah was leading some folks in some training. So this makes a link, as she mentioned, it makes a link to not only possibilities for those of us among us who want to do more than just sit quietly back and pray that something doesn't happen, but that maybe be involved with our actions, with our bodies to shed light when injustice occurs locally. And that might be pertaining to the proposed ICE detention, but yes, it has to do with raids that pick up immigrants in factories and potentially break up families and things in the local community. So pay attention, because we may be getting more information out to you all. And yes, I am very interested to see if we could have a couple people from Waterford take part in this training, to be able to give training to some of the rest of us, because I think some of us are not used to nonviolent direct action, and it feels outside of our comfort zone. But even if some of us are considering, maybe God is calling me to be more actively involved, my perception is that poorly trained and poorly prepared people doing this can damage themselves and damage the cause. Therefore, some kinds of training for what it means to enact and live out Christ-centered nonviolence, but to do so carefully, as wise as serpents and innocent as doves, would be very important. And some of us have so little experience in that we would be well served to undertake some of that training in order to be more visible voices for justice in the local community. So stay tuned. There will be more opportunities coming up, that I think those opportunities are going to continue coming our way, whether or not this detention center shows up or not. Other questions? Anybody else have questions for Sarah?
Sarah, we arrived a little bit late. I was just wondering, did you share what the issues were in the places that you had teams on the ground, like in Kurdistan? And you mentioned Israel earlier, and Colombia, and with the original land settlers in Canada. What were the issues that Christian Peacemaker Teams was called to be a part of?
Cool. Thanks, Dad. That's cool. Okay. So I just introduced people to the low-tech PowerPoint. That's how I did that, and invited them to participate in kind of reading over time, over a consistent basis, about what's happening in Iraqi Kurdistan. The people of the mountains, the Kurds, have suffered tremendously from colonial line drawing that are arbitrary lines that seek to procure a lot of resources for extraction and for other people, regardless of what happens to the civilian community members there. And from Baghdad, we were invited to move up to Iraqi Kurdistan, because so the northern part of Iraq and Syria, Iran, and Turkey. What happened is that at a certain point in the U.S.-led war, visibility with internationals was helpful to the cause, and at some point it flipped, right? And so high visibility with internationals made people more targets. And so our friends and colleagues there said, "Can you go?" And we said, "No problem," right? Because it's not about protecting our turf or something like that. So no problem. If we're unhelpful at a certain moment, we'll go. So we said, we're ready to go. And they said, wait a second. Actually, we called our friends up north. We think that you can be helpful up there. And there's quite a few civil society organizations in Kurdistan seeking to agitate for and create a civil society that does not rely on weaponry and threats of violence within it in order to move forward. And they're going through some really intense times right now as they decide whether or not to pass a referendum to move forward in their journey of self-determination, or whether or not that referendum will not assist them. And so we are participating with coalitions of teachers and others who are working for their rights in that context, and also being tremendous peacemakers who are taking stances in the face of intense local repression and the international community. So that's Kurdistan. And there's more there in each of these places. And in Colombia, as the dynamics of that U.S.-backed war, a lot of Colombians have been displaced. Originally, Colombia had The highest amount of displaced people on the planet was only recently surpassed by Syria. So you can know how bad that is in terms of being internally displaced. And as farmers go back to their land, they're finding that multinational corporations have set up shop there, and that military forces who are being demobilized are now finding jobs as armed security officers for corporations that create products that are exported to us. And so the dynamics of that war are changing, and Colombian partners, many of them church members, Colombian Mennonites, and others are challenging us to say, okay, so we're pacifists vis-a-vis the state and armies. What's our theology of pacifism vis-a-vis corporations? Yeah, some people have been working on this for a while, but it's something that we need to mainstream among us. How are we, like, if corporate actors are now some of the greatest purveyors of violence on the planet, what does pacifism mean in that context? So we're thinking about some of that, but the daily work is to accompany them, to do documentation, and many of them do have legal access to the land, but are not being granted it by the corporations. But we've had some victories there and actually regaining that land together with local partners. We always work in partnership with local folks. So that's Colombia. Alongside First Nations here, basically we were doing a lot of similar work that happened at Standing Rock for about a decade before that. So we were one of the community of people who were looking at what decolonization means, or in other words, taking away the structures of extraction from the earth and the structures of genocide and enslavement that have founded these areas, to see what are the healthiest ways to live with and through and in this planet at this time, and sitting alongside our indigenous brothers and sisters who are seeking sovereignty and trying to resist ongoing ecological devastation and cultural desecration. And they offer things to us like, we respect your golden rule, do unto others as you have them do unto you. And we would also invite you to incorporate do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do to you. And so looking at what it means to test the water and know that there's high mercury levels, and then trace that back to the source of where it's coming from, who has been exploiting the land, and challenging those companies in that confrontational peacemaking way.
Is there, I'll take it back there.
Just recently in the news, there's been a talk about the closing of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Authority's diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C., because of the PLO trying to take Israel to the International Court for some of their actions. And I wonder if you could enlighten us on that a little bit. Is it really illegal to speak against Israel? I've heard that they're trying to make it that anything you say against Israel is anti-Semitic, when it has nothing to do necessarily with them being Jewish. It has to do with what they're doing.
I think you understand that.
Is there a law?
You understand
is there a law like that?
So on the state level, there are some folks are trying to pass some anti-boycott, divestment, and sanctions laws, and that means that if you are so boycotts and divestment and sanctions for many are part of the range of nonviolent tactics that can be used to put pressure on governments or other entities to come to the table for a true negotiation in which more peaceful relations and more just economics can happen. This is because the assumption is not that our economic systems are neutral, but that they are set up in such a way that privilege the few and the many are working and not making it. And so this is not too far from home. In fact, one of our own, Esther Kuntz, who's a math teacher in Kansas, was going to sign up for a statewide job opportunity, and related to mathematics. And in order to do that, she needed to sign something that said, I will not participate in BDS activities, or I will not participate in a boycott of Israel. Right? These are very unrelated things, a math teacher, this boycott. But she said, my church has just called me to think more deeply about the economic violence that I'm participating in as a result of the work that many have done for the resolution that passed this past summer. And she said, I can't in good conscience sign that. And so she did not receive that job. Right? So for many then around the country, this is an opportunity to lift up the constraints that are being placed on those who seek to talk about the injustice that is happening in Israel-Palestine. I spent a lot of time when I was in Jerusalem as well with young rabbinical students. Every rabbinical student now who's studying to be a Jewish rabbi must spend some time in Israel. They are told not to go to Palestine because it's dangerous for them. But some sneak across anyway. And they come in. So I was riding my bicycle around, and I saw some folks that looked a little out of place. So I went up to them and I'm like, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from Elkhart. And we began speaking. And they said, look, we're in Palestine. We're here because we want to stop this U.S. and Israeli military occupation of Palestine, not just for the sake of Palestinian self-determination and human rights, but because the ethical core of Judaism is at stake right now. We're a multifaceted tradition that had a great ability to hold on to the minority voice and to different ways of being, and we are being smashed on one side by militarism and smashed on the other side by nationalism, and we're in this crucible right now. And we think it's our job as young rabbinical students to find a way out for our folks so that our faith doesn't get captured by empire. And I said to them, far be it from me to comment on your quest, but as someone from a tradition who seeks to remember far back to before 313 and before our faith was captured by empire, I will do everything I can to support you in your endeavors. And we've remained friends to this day, and it's worked to even, I'm participating in one of the non-Zionist and non-assimilationist synagogues that are sprouting up to try to hold on to the richness and amazingness that Judaism has to offer the world amidst the pain that they're going through right now. And Anabaptism, because of our commitments that we must keep and we must continue to agitate and refine, we can offer a lot. Because we too seek to not be smashed and squished by militarism and nationalism, but have a faith that says the whole world matters and that we're in this together and that we need each other. So these are really difficult times. Many people are denied entry to Israel, so because you need to get, Israel controls the border, so to get our folks into Palestine, you have to go through there. So we continually lose people because they can't get in. And then also these boycott laws are very dangerous and constrict life. Israel sometimes say, why are you pointing the finger at us? Look back at home. And that's part of the reason that we do have an Indigenous People Solidarity team here, because this too is a settler colonial state. And we must always and at every opportunity acknowledge the Potawatomi peoples who are right here before us, but they're not only history. They're currently alive and living, but very, very impacted by what happened in the 1830s. And so continuing to do the work at home, I think, and being in a Baptist faith tradition, or at least in conversation with it, can provide a lot for that conversation around anti-Semitism and calling Christian Zionism for what it is, which is an anti-Semitic distortion of theology, which is seeking a certain apocalyptic future in which Jews have only the choice to convert or die. Rather, we're all in this together and have a chance to be powerful. So, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we're going to need to draw it to a close. I find that last thing just fascinating, though, because it's always so true. There are many other aspects of people and voices for peace and solidarity than what we often hear about here in the United States, including, for example, those rabbinical students. That's very encouraging. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. Let's pause just for a brief prayer, then we'll be dismissed for maybe a little bit more coffee or for stretching, and the second service will start in a few minutes. We pause, O God, In silence, we reflect upon the vastness of inequities and injustice that are there in our world. Sometimes we simply have not had our eyes and ears opened to them. Sometimes we confess we have not wanted to know about them. We thank you for the resources you have given to us, including faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ, where Jesus was willing to be killed, but not to take life. Inspire us, O God, with these moments